Okay, so ready to dive into grit.
Absolutely, let's do it.
This book, I gotta say, it really changed how I think about success. It's like we're always told, right, that talent is the big thing.
Right, like you're born with it, you've got it or you don't.
Yeah, exactly. But Angela Duckworth's research, it's like she took that idea and just flipped it on its head.
And that's what we're going to unpack today, all those juicy details.
Because it's not just some theory, right? She's got some pretty interesting examples.
Oh, for sure. Like, think about this, the Beast Barracks, that brutal training program they have at West Point. Duckworth found that a cadet's grit score, that actually predicted if they'd make it through, even better than their grades or how fit they were.
No way.
Yeah.
Seriously. So it's more about what? Just that pure determination.
That's a huge part of it. And here's the thing. A lot of high achievers, they don't even think they're all that talented.
Get out. You're kidding.
I'm serious. Take Scott Barry Kaufman. He's this psychologist who really struggled early on, got labeled with learning disabilities, felt like he wasn't smart enough, by those traditional measures.
Wow. So if talent isn't the be-all, end-all, then what is?
That's where grit comes in, this powerful combo of passion and perseverance, but it's got to be towards long-term goals.
So not just like, I'm excited about this for 5 minutes.
Yep, this is the long game.
Yeah.
Like Kaufman, he didn't let those labels define him. He went all in on music, academics, even tackled Latin and the school musical.
Wow.
It was that willingness to explore, to push his own boundaries. That's how he found his strengths and built a seriously impressive career.
So inspiring. But okay, how does Duckworth define passion here? Because I feel like we throw that word around a lot.
Right, it's more than just a fleeting feeling. We're not talking about chasing butterflies here. It's got to be deep, enduring, a love for what you do that just grows over time.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It's not like, oh, that's nice, and then you move on.
Exactly. Think about it like, remember that feeling when you first picked up grit? Now imagine that feeling. Instead of fading, it actually gets stronger as you learn more and connect with it on a deeper level.
That's a great way to put it. It's almost like you uncover more and more as you go deeper.
Exactly. You don't need that aha moment right away.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just unfolds over time.
Makes sense. So it's not about having all the answers up front, but more about staying open, letting those interests kind of bubble up naturally.
Exactly. Think about Will Shortz, the crossword puzzle guy from the New York Times. His mom, she encouraged him to explore everything. Puzzle books, music, radio dramas, you name it.
Wow, talk about a wide range.
Right. And it wasn't about being the best at everything right away. It was about exposure. That created the perfect environment for his passions to come alive.
So it's more about like creating the space for those interests to grow.
Yeah.
But then there's got to be more to it than just being interested in something. You've got to put in the work, right?
You hit the nail on the head. That's where deliberate practice comes in. It's pushing past just having fun, Getting into that mastery zone where you're looking for those little nuances, always trying to refine your skills.
So not just messing around, but really being intentional about improving.
100%.
Yeah.
Psychologist Paul Sylvia, he calls it the difference between, get this, beginner's novelty and expert's novelty. Beginners get excited by anything new, right?
Dense.
But experts, they crave those subtle challenges, the tiny details that push them further.
That's fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And it reminds me of something you mentioned about talking to that chef,
Oh, you mean Mark Vetri?
Yeah, him.
He was incredible. Talking about his early years, he was just obsessed with learning, always experimenting, asking other chefs for feedback, that kind of thing.
And look where it got him.
He told me this great story about this master pasta maker in Italy. This guy basically said, the minute you think you're done learning, you're done. That always stuck with me.
It's so true, though. And it gets to the heart of deliberate practice. It's never being satisfied, always searching for those opportunities to get better, to refine your craft.
It's an ongoing process, not a destination.
Exactly.
But, I don't know, this whole deliberate practice thing, it sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, I can see that.
Is there no room for, like, just getting lost in it? You know, that flow state where you're so engrossed, time just disappears.
That's a great question. Duckworth actually talks about that debate. It seems like experts, they experience both flow and deliberate practice, but maybe in different ways.
How so?
Well, like flow, that might be more spontaneous, that in-the-zone feeling you get during a performance.
Okay, yeah, I got that.
But deliberate practice, that's the behind-the-scenes work, the foundation that makes those flow states even possible in the first place.
So they work together.
They do.
It's like one without the other isn't enough.
It's that balance, and it's something to think about as we, it's about laying the groundwork.
Right, like you're setting yourself up for those moments of brilliance.
Exactly. Think about, like, what a perfect tenniser looks effortless when you see it, right?
Totally.
But behind that, there are hours and hours of practice, tiny adjustments, this constant push for precision. That's what makes it look so easy.
So it's not like we're saying natural talent doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It's more like even talent needs that nurturing, that development to really shine.
100%. And Duckworth takes it even further. She talks about how sometimes putting too much emphasis on talent, it can actually backfire.
Really? How so?
Well, it can create this culture of like elitism,
Yeah.
where it's only a select few who are considered like worthy of
Oh, I
success.
see what you mean.
And that can be super discouraging for people who maybe don't fit that mold or who don't have that like instant talent.
Yeah, it's like you're telling everyone else they're not even allowed on the playing field.
Exactly. And then what happens? People stop trying. Why bother, right, if you don't feel like you're naturally gifted?
It's like it creates this fixed mindset where you're so afraid to take risks, to screw up, even to try something new because you're terrified of failing or, like you said, being seen as untalented.
Right. You hit the nail on the head.
It reminds me of, remember we were talking about the cartoonist Bob Mankoff?
Yeah, yeah.
He was saying how early on he was so sure of his talent it actually held him back.
Because he was coasting on that belief.
Yeah, he didn't put in the work, and it took all these rejections, these setbacks, for him to realize talent alone wasn't enough.
It's like what we were talking about with deliberate practice. Even if you start with some natural ability, you got to be willing to put in the reps, make mistakes, really refine your craft. It's that constant striving that makes the difference.
And it's not just about individual growth either, right?
Yeah.
Because if a whole organization is hyper-focused on talent, that can create a toxic environment.
Oh, absolutely. Like, people become more worried about outshining each other than actually working
So
together.
it becomes all about ego, right? Instead of, like, collaboration and growth.
100%. And that can have serious consequences. I mean, think about it. Morale plummets, productivity tanks. You might even see some shady ethical stuff start to happen.
Because it's not sustainable, that kind of environment. It's not healthy.
Not at all. So if focusing only on talent is like a recipe for disaster, what's the alternative?
Yeah, how do we flip the script? How do we create a space where everyone feels like they can thrive?
Well, Duckworth suggests a big part of it is shifting our focus. We've got to move away from this obsession with innate ability and start valuing things like effort, dedication, a growth mindset.
So celebrating the hard work, the perseverance,
Hmm.
the willingness to embrace challenges, not just the stars.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's about recognizing that everyone has the potential to grow and succeed no matter where they start.
Which is incredibly empowering when you think about it.
It is, because it means you're not stuck. You have the power to shape your own path.
And it ties back into what we were talking about earlier with Duckworth's research on follow-through. Remember how she found that students who stuck with their extracurriculars, even when things got tough, they were more likely to thrive.
Totally. It's that commitment, that willingness to see something through that really sets people apart. And it's not just about blindly following a path just because you started it. It's about making a conscious choice and then being dedicated to it, even when things get messy, even when there are setbacks.
So it's about finding that balance between flexibility and structure, like allowing for exploration and growth, but also honoring your commitments.
You got it. It's a delicate dance, right?
It is.
But that's where the good stuff happens. And that brings us to this bigger idea of creating a culture of grit, not just for individuals, but for families, for organizations, even for communities.
It's like, how do we make grit contagious?
Right. And Duckworth uses this really cool example that Seattle Seahawks, the football team, under Pete Carroll, their coach, they've built this amazing culture. It's competitive for sure, but it's also incredibly supportive.
Oh, I like that.
Players are encouraged to push their limits, to learn from their mistakes, to always be striving for better.
And it's clearly working.
Yeah.
I mean, they're consistently a top team. They've got this reputation for resilience, for determination.
It shows that grit isn't just some individual thing, It can be this powerful force that lifts everyone up.
So it's about building an environment where challenges are seen as opportunities, setbacks are seen as learning experiences, and perseverance is celebrated, right?
Exactly. And that idea, it goes way beyond sports. Think about wise parenting, something Duckworth talks about. It's about creating that nurturing and supportive environment for kids, but also setting high expectations, encouraging them to embrace challenges.
It's that balance again, love and limits, right? You're not shielding kids from every difficulty. You're giving them the tools and support they need to face things head on, to build their own resilience.
Yes. And it's not just about protecting them, it's about preparing them for the path ahead. And
Yeah.
that same idea, it applies to leadership, to mentorship, really to any area of life where you're trying to help others grow.
One of the things that really resonated with me in the book was hearing about Duckworth's own journey with grit.
Oh, yeah.
Because for her, it wasn't like this natural, effortless thing. She had to work at it, just like everyone else.
Which makes it all the more relatable, you know?
It does. She talks about how her dad, he was constantly comparing her to Einstein. Can you imagine? Talk about pressure.
Oh, my goodness. That's a lot to live up to.
Right. And I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling. If you feel like you don't measure up to some standard of intelligence or whatever.
It's so easy to get caught in that trap of comparison.
It is. But what I love about Duckworth's story is she didn't let those comparisons define her. She figured out her own strengths, she went after her passions, and she made her own definition of success.
And that's such a powerful message. It's like we all have our own unique blend of talents and skills, and comparing ourselves to others, it often just leads to frustration.
It's a recipe for self-sabotage.
Totally. Speaking of unique paths, remember how Duckworth talks about her friend Jeffrey Gettleman?
The journalist.
Yeah, him. Pulitzer Prize winner, by the way. He had this very clear goal. He wanted to be the East Africa bureau chief for the New York Times.
Ambitious.
Right. And he got there, but it wasn't some straight shot to the top. He had his share of bumps in the road, but he never gave up on that dream.
It's a good reminder that success rarely follows a straight line, doesn't it?
Rarely ever. It's
Yeah.
usually messy, full of detours, and it's that grit, that passion and perseverance that helps you navigate all those twists and turns.
It's about staying the course, even when you're not sure where you'll end up.
Exactly. Because that journey, even with all its challenges, that's where the real growth happens.
And that's what makes it so satisfying, right? It's not just about the destination. It's the whole journey that gets you there.
Right.
But it's not always easy, is it?
Not always, no. Duckworth, she's pretty upfront about that. Grit takes work, especially when you're talking about sticking with something, year after year.
It's that long game again.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. Duckworth found that follow-through, that ability to stick with a commitment over the long haul. That was a stronger predictor of success than even talent or intelligence.
Wow, you're kidding. So it's more important than how smart you are or what your natural abilities are.
That's what her research suggests. She saw this especially with students involved in extracurriculars.
So the ones who stuck with it, even when it got hard, they ended up achieving more.
Exactly. They were more likely to excel in school, take on leadership roles, even go on to do some pretty impressive things as young adults. And it's like what Warren Willingham found too, with his personal qualities project.
Remind me, what was that one again?
So he followed these hundreds of super accomplished people, but for decades. And he found a similar pattern.
Those who really made a mark, they weren't always the most naturally gifted.
Right. It was the ones who were just relentlessly dedicated to their thing. They stuck with it.
It really flips that whole gifted genius thing on its head, doesn't it? That idea
Yeah.
that some people are just born brilliant and everything comes easily.
It does. It's talent plays a role, but maybe passion, perseverance, and that willingness to just keep going, maybe those are even more important in the grand scheme of things.
It makes you wonder, how many times we mistake that initial excitement, that, ooh, shiny object, feeling for actual passion.
Right, because it's easy to be gung-ho when something's new, right? But to keep that fire going year after year, especially when you hit those roadblocks, that's a whole other ballgame.
That's where the grit comes in. Having that inner drive, that deep down belief that what you're doing matters, that's what pushes you to keep going, even when that initial excitement wears off.
I think you've got it.
Yeah.
And Duckworth, she doesn't just stop at the psychology of all this. She goes into, the neurobiology of hope, too.
The what? Okay, now you're just using big words.
I know, right? But seriously, she talks about this fascinating research by a psychologist named Steve Mayer.
What did he find?
Okay, so he was studying this thing called learned helplessness. And basically, he found that when animals are put through stressful situations over and over again, and they can't control what's happening, eventually they just give up.
They give up, even if there's a way out.
Even then, it's like they learn to be helpless, like they're resigned to their fate.
Oh, that's kind of sad.
It is, right. It's like our brains can actually learn to be helpless. But here's the hopeful part. Meyer also discovered that if animals have early experiences where they can control the stressful situation, it's like they're inoculated against learned helplessness.
So it's like those early experiences, those little wins, they actually rewire their brains to be more resilient.
Exactly. It's like they build up this reserve of resilience that they can tap into later on when things get tough.
That makes me think about how important it is for kids,
Hmm.
to let them face challenges, to work through difficulties. Of course, you want to be there to support them, but maybe letting them struggle a bit isn't such a bad thing.
It's all about finding that balance because, like you said, shielding them from everything might seem kind in the moment, but in the long run, it could actually make them less equipped to handle life's curveballs.
It's about fostering that I can handle this attitude, which really, when you think about it, that's what grit is all about, isn't it?
100%. It's that belief in yourself that even when things get messy, you can figure it out. You can learn from it and come out the other side even stronger. And that kind of resilience, that grit, that's something we can keep building on our whole lives.
And Duckworth gives us some pretty concrete advice on how to do that. Like, remember her hard thing rule?
Oh, yeah. So good, right?
It's so simple, but it really stuck with me.
Because it totally works. Break it down for us again.
Okay, so there are three parts. One, everyone has to do a hard thing, something that takes real effort. Two, no quitting halfway through the year. You make a commitment, you stick with it. And three, you get to pick a new hard thing next year.
I love that because it's not about being miserable, right? It's about pushing yourself, but also having the freedom to explore, to find what really lights your fire.
And to adjust as you go, because what's challenging one year might not be so tough the next, and that's okay.
Growth isn't linear.
It's so true.
Okay.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into grit, the thing I keep coming back to is this feeling of empowerment.
Yeah, it's hopeful, isn't it?
It is, because it's not about waiting around for some magical talent fairy to sprinkle you with success dust.
Yep.
It's about realizing you have the power to build your own grit, to embrace those challenges, to push through those setbacks with purpose and determination. It's about deciding what you're willing to work for, what you're going to pour your heart and soul into, and then going for it.
Beautifully said. It's about creating that environment both inside ourselves and in the world around us, where effort is celebrated, perseverance is valued, and grit is the fuel that drives us forward. So, as you go about your day, we'll leave you with this. What's your hard thing? And are you ready to embrace it with all the grit you've got?